Author Ronald Kessler, how much damage was done to American security by Russian attempts to penetrate the U.S. Embassy in Moscow?
When we last tuned into this, we were told that first the KGB had been allowed to run around wild in the embassy. Then we were told nothing ever happened. Well, as it turned out, it was much worse than what we heard originally. The CIA and the NSA actually found bugging devices on the CIA cipher machines, and as a result of that, some 25 Soviets were executed as either real or suspected CIA agents. Basically, the whole CIA station in Moscow was closed down because of this penetration.
How much lasting damage?
Well, it's going to take many years for any Soviets to want to cooperate with the CIA in Moscow. In addition, the KGB was able to read communications of the State Department on arms negotiations. It's hard to reconstruct just what kind of damage that did. But basically, we have a situation where the KGB still effectively spies in the United States, but in the Soviet Union, as far as human intelligence is concerned, there's a tremendous imbalance.
The book is Moscow Station, How the KGB Penetrated the American Embassy. The author is Ronald Kessler, who joins us today. He has previously written The Life Insurance Game, The Richest Man in the World, and Spy versus Spy. He was an investigative reporter for the Washington Post from 1970 to 1987, worked for the Wall Street Journal from 68 to 70, and before that worked for the Worcester Telegram and the Boston Herald, originally from Belmont, Massachusetts. And I guess since we're both from the same area, I could say the Worcester Telegram.
Exactly.
We'll be taking your calls in just a few moments. The numbers will be listed throughout the show at the bottom of the screen. And remember the 30-day policy. If you've called in within the last month, wait, and let's give someone else a chance to get through. Okay, how could this have happened?
You would think that in this most sensitive post in the world that the security would be fantastic, but it was just the opposite. The security was not as good as your local grocery store. First of all, they sent these inexperienced 21-year-old Marines in there without wives, not allowing them to have girls in their rooms. They were sitting ducks for the KGB's entrapment efforts. The KGB would send in these very attractive swallows, as they call them, seductive young women to entice the Marines, and it was just no match. And that's exactly how Lone Tree began his spying. That's exactly how Bracey began his spying. In addition, you had the State Department not really caring very much about security. The diplomats have this ingrained attitude that somehow security impairs their efforts to improve relations with the Soviets, which simply is something that has no connection whatsoever. You can have security in your house, for example, and be friendly with your neighbors, but that doesn't mean you have to let them in or leave your door unlocked all night. And that's basically what happened. After midnight, there was one Marine who guarded the whole embassy. He had access. He gave access to people in the front entrance. He also guarded the 9th floor where the communications room was. The alarms were such that they could be turned off by the Marine without any record being kept of when they were turned off. He also had the codes to enter the CPU or the communications room. So really it was not very difficult to let the KGB into the communications area, and that's just what happened. In addition, on top of all this, you had the Naval Investigative Service, which later tried to find out what happened, tried to bring the perpetrators to justice, and they simply were not equipped to conduct an espionage investigation. Normally the FBI does that. They're very experienced at it, and they're very good at it, and the NIS really totally botched this investigation.
You mentioned earlier that the first reports came out, said one thing, then other reports came out, gave a differing picture. Why did that happen?
It began when Lone Tree confessed, and he didn't confess to letting people into the embassy, just to giving information to the KGB, which in fact he did to a much greater extent than came out at the time. He actually gave them floor plans, details of how alarms work, names of CIA officers. But then Arnold Bracey, the second Marine involved, confessed to actually letting the KGB into the embassy. And it was a very detailed confession, a very credible confession. But he recanted. And as soon as he recanted, the whole scandal went away because the NIS had not done their basic homework before they confronted Bracey. They didn't develop any background information on him. And so after he confessed, it was very difficult to corroborate his confession because they hadn't asked the right questions. And so that was it. And then as it turned out, about 6 months later, the NSA and primarily the NSA began examining the communications equipment here in Washington with X-rays and spectroscopic analysis, and that's when they found that in fact microchips in the printers had been replaced, that the power line to the CPU had been replaced, and that in fact they're still studying how these bugs work, which is exactly the same situation that happened with the new embassy around the corner from the old embassy in Moscow. And the same pattern existed there. That is the same pattern of concealing what the findings were. The new embassy bugs were first found in 1982. The CIA sort of began whispering this to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but first they would refer to them as anomalies, and it wasn't until about last year that we were finally told that yes, there were bugs in the new embassy. In fact, that the whole embassy was one big bugging device, and that it was so bad that there was no way that this building could be used, and the only solution was to tear it down. That's what's happened in this case. The CIA has issued what appeared to be a denial that there were bugs, but actually there were quite a few loopholes in that statement, and they're doing the same thing with this. They're avoiding confronting the issue. They're avoiding saying publicly that in fact bugs were found. They're taking the position that they're still studying it. They're still trying to figure out how they work. We don't know fully what the KGB got out of this, and it's a pattern that doesn't lend itself to reforming the situation.
Let's go to the phones. Lincoln, Nebraska, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a question for the author. I'm a 19-year-old, and I know how you feel about the fact that we entrust this kind of information, this kind of secrecy to these young Americans overseas and abroad, and if you could expand on that, because I know that I have strong feelings against the fact that such secrecy is entrusted to these young gentlemen, and these gentlemen are expected to uphold the bond that we have, the secrecy, and I need to know how you feel about that.
Well, I agree with you. The logical solution would be to send in mature, married, experienced, professional guards, such as the Executive Protective Service officers who protect embassies in Washington, people who are well paid, who choose that as a profession, rather than Marines who don't necessarily want to be guards. They join the Marines to fight, and they may do a wonderful job of that, and we may be very proud of them in that regard. But when it comes to matching wits with the KGB, it's just a joke. There's no way that they can do that. They're very naive, and a lot of them are involved in various problems. There have been a lot of drug problems, a lot of other criminal activities by a large percentage, 10% to be exact, of the Marine security guards in our embassies overseas.
Let's go right here at home to Washington, D.C.
Yes, I didn't hear that last question. I hope this isn't a duplicate of it. But when I was in the Marine Corps, embassy duty was considered an excellent job, and only the elite had it. According to what I heard, I never had it. But what has happened?
That was the tradition, but somehow, as the Marine Corps felt that they weren't getting enough recruits and they weren't allowed to have enough positions, they began sending the best Marines to fighting units, and just to some extent, the less qualified Marines were being sent to guard duty.
Let's go out to the West Coast, Tacoma, Washington. You're on the air.
Yes, this is Tacoma.
Go right ahead.
Not one word of this do I believe is true about those Marines in Moscow. I don't know why this came about. I have no idea why it came about, but there's a whole lot of Americans know that this is not true. I can't understand any Marine, soul, or anybody doing anything like this. That's all I have to say.
Well, it's very hard to understand criminal activity, period. You know, why would anybody take a chance at robbing a bank and end up in prison for the rest of his life? It is inconceivable to a law-abiding person, but yet it happens. People do commit espionage. Walker committed espionage, Pelton, and we have the same situation here. Lone Tree was convicted. He admitted that he did this, And to say, no, I can't believe it, and these are patriotic people, and I don't want to hear about it, is to simply perpetuate the situation that created this. It's a naive attitude that we Americans tend to have about espionage, and if we don't realize that it's happening, obviously it's going to happen even more.
Let's go up to Boston, Massachusetts. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am with Friends of the Wampanoags here in New England, and particularly interested in Native American justice. It seems to me that Lone Tree was sort of set up, and I'm wondering what you think about his having another trial or whatever it takes to get him out of Leavenworth.
Well, just because Lone Tree happens to be from a minority does not mean that he was set up. Is that what you feel? She's gone. As I said, he confessed. His confession was corroborated. He said he was about to meet with certain KGB officers, and sure enough, these KGB officers did show up at the very same place where he said they were going to show up. He's since given much more information about what he did there. And it's really unfortunate that people would say, well, because this person is black or Jewish or Muslim or Indian, that therefore he's innocent. That's just foolishness.
The next call is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Go right ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm so intrigued by your methods used in investigative reporting, particularly of this nature where everything is so secretive. That's one comment I wish to make. And then I'm going to tell you about something that I think also needs investigation and how you would be able to go about it or whether or not you could. In other words, the number of missiles that this country purchased in the last 8 or 9 years, stored, sold, a complete inventory on them. I have a reason for that. I know a controller who works in a high-tech corporation. He's worked there for 12 years. And at one point, well into the Reagan administration, he made one comment. He said, my God, we're making so many missiles, I don't know what the hell they're doing with them. I'm concerned about the ones being sold to Iraq and Iran to continue the war for them to knock each other off.
Well, that's well beyond the scope of my book. As for my methods in this investigation, I had previously done a book called Spy versus Spy, which is on how the FBI tracks spies, and so I got some familiarity with how this whole world works, what the real world of spying is all about as opposed to the fictional world. And in the course of that, I developed some sources, and I heard that there was more there that happened in Moscow than we'd heard about. But beyond that, it was simply a straight investigative job of interviewing almost everybody there and trying to piece together what happened. Really, there was no magical method. It was just a lot of hard work, frankly.
It's Slaughter, New Mexico. You're on C-SPAN.
Yes, sir. Ron?
Yes.
Did you cover the trial that Lone Tree underwent?
No, I had not become interested in it at that time.
Are you aware that the commander handpicks the jury?
Yes.
In other words, the jury wasn't selected at random?
Yes.
Is that a fair jury?
Well, the fact is that military juries do acquit people, and in fact, in the case of Bracey, the charges were dismissed by the military on his case, and in some ways, the military can actually be more fair than the civilian justice system. A lot of people in the military don't necessarily want to go along with what they think the commander wants, and they want to give the person a fair trial. And I think that the record of the military justice system indicates that justice does prevail there.
Bennington, Vermont is our next call.
Yes, Mr. Kessler.
Yes.
I've followed the story for a little time in Reader's Digest when it first came up. I'm wondering, have we forbidden the Soviets from taking occupation of their embassy in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, as far as the office space is concerned, they're not allowed in there, although there's some suspicion that they might go in there at night and do bugging there. But and likewise in Moscow, we have not occupied our office space. In both cities, the residential areas are occupied.
You talk a lot in the book, or it's mentioned often, about the 9th floor room. Could you expand on that a little bit for us now?
9th floor is where the ambassador's office is, and it's also where the CPU is. The CPU is an enclosed room the size of several living rooms in an average home, which is supposed to prevent radio waves from entering the room or leaving the room. It's simply a metal sheathed enclosure. And the idea is that we don't want to have any bugging devices or signals going out of there. On the other hand, the power line is very vulnerable to attack because you still have to get power into that room, and it's possible to introduce signals on the power line, especially if you replace the power line, which is what happened in this case.
Let's go to Peekskill, New York. You're next.
Mr. Kessler.
Yes.
First, I comment, and then I have a question. It appears to me that, in general, the American community is either lulled or is becoming complacent by the changes that are occurring in the Soviet Union. And I suspect that, by and large, we mistake these changes as something that is affecting us, and that is we should not worry about the threat of communism that has, I guess, been around for about 70 years. And initially, the Soviets told us outright that their ultimate goal was to conquer the world. I believe within this past year, they have officially stated that this is not their goal. However, Americans, by and large, feel that all you have to do is talk to the Soviets, that the people basically are all the same. We in this country, they in the Soviet Union. And so consequently, it's the governments. That may be so to an extent. But young Marines in Soviet embassy or anywhere else in the world, or young Americans who are now possibly are going over to the Soviet Union, are not aware of the continuing espionage and the intelligence of the KGB and the effort that the KGB is still continuing in undermining our policies and our government. Most Americans today are still not aware that half of the Soviet Union, for example, is non-Russian ethnically, that the Ukrainians or Armenians or Latvians still do not wish to be part of that empire. So my question to you, sir, is do you feel that if an educational program, a national educational program, could be promoted to somehow tell Americans that the threat is still continuing? And if so, do you have any idea how that could be done, sir?
Well, you know, I certainly agree with you that the threat continues. We have to remain strong, not only as far as Soviets are concerned, but in relation to other countries, including countries that pursue terrorist policies. And I think the President has certainly indicated that we still, you know, have to be on our guard. On the other hand, we don't want to close our eyes to the fact that changes have been made, that by both actions and words, the Soviets have showed that they are not pursuing expansionist policies. Now that could change. Gorbachev could be killed, whatever. But and so we do have to remain strong. So it's you know, it's a somewhat it's a changing situation, and I think just through our media, through what Bush has said, and what other political leaders have said, the American people probably do get the message that there have been changes, and we don't want to, you know, be belligerent with them. At the same time, we still have to remain strong and on our guard.
Technically, Moscow Station was due out in March, but is it in the bookstores now? Can you get it?
In most bookstores, it is there. The official publication date is in March, though.
Let's go down to Austin, Texas. You're on C-SPAN.
I have a question about the CIA and the question about the FBI. About Edward Lee Howard in the book, The Spy Who Got Away by David Wise. I talked to the author of this book about 8 months ago on C-SPAN, and he couldn't answer either one of these questions. I'm hoping maybe you can. But Edward Lee Howard was discovered to have alcohol and drug problems by the CIA. They basically just fired him and cut him loose, and then he did all sorts of damage to our country and the CIA. Why didn't the CIA reassign him, put him in some lesser job in this country, and keep an eye on him instead of just cutting him loose to where he could just go off like a loose cannon? That's question number one. And the second question, when the FBI realized what he was doing, why did they put such a junior and rookie FBI agent to watch him under surveillance, and he eventually got away and escaped out of the country?
Well, those are extremely tough questions. I can understand why David Weiss had trouble answering them. There is no answer. It's simply unthinkable lack of judgment, and it's simply basic that if somebody has an alcohol problem and also has all these secrets about what happened, or how the CIA operates in Moscow, that you don't just fire him without letting him find another job. But the more important question to me is, why are those people who made those judgments still at the CIA? Why is it that in this government, in general, we don't have a tradition of at least firing people who make mistakes, especially egregious mistakes that cause serious damage to our security? That's, I think, the more important question, because you're always going to have mistakes to one degree or another. But to leave these people, to create a situation where people are unaccountable and don't suffer any reprisals for their actions, just encourages more of these mistakes.
Let's go to Rialto, California. You're next.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask that as far as the CIA and the embassy and all of this is concerned, I think that basically we should get back to basics. I think things have just really blown out of proportion, and things have been made bigger than what it really is. And I think that if we could get up some kind of resources or plans so that the CIA or the military that's involved should have some kind of training from the beginning, because like the revolution, things people have heard from the wars and what things have happened over the years, they really don't know. All we know is what we read and are told about. There are certain things that people shouldn't know about that is specifically secret. But if we keep on letting so many different people that has a lot of I can't think of the word, but to get to the point is that I think that we should have some kind of training that when these young kids come out of high school and go off into the service and everything, they should have a program where they are trained to respect and protect their home.
All right, thank you very much. I think we have the point. Respond.
Well, we basically just have to do our jobs better and not simply defend past mistakes, which is what these agencies have been doing. The Marine Corps still sends in these young, inexperienced Marines. They've increased training by 1 or 2 hours in counterintelligence, which is nothing. The basic problem remains that the Marines shouldn't be sent there in the first place. The State Department still doesn't care very much about security. Naval Investigative Service still investigates espionage when they totally screwed up all these espionage investigations. We don't want to just throw up our hands and say, well, we don't understand what's going on here, and let's just sort of educate the whole American public. There are very specific things that need to be done, and they're not being done. And I think that that's the problem. And beyond that, there's no accountability in the government. There's no mechanism for dealing with mistakes like this.
Let's go up to New York City for our next call. You're on C-SPAN.
Good morning. I have two comments I'd like you to comment on. One, it would appear throughout history that as any system, whether it's U.S. Steel or U.S. Marines, get bureaucratized, the skills needed to reach decision-making positions are not the ones that are necessary to make the decisions good ones. Our military history of the past, since the Second World War, has not been an indicator of great competence. It seems to me that some analysis should be made of the people who chose and put those young Marines in the embassies rather than simply trying to blame the poor young Marines.
I agree entirely.
Okay,
and
but one other thing
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to comment on, and then I'll disconnect. I was rereading John le Carré the other day, and had a tentative thought. Considering that the sort of manic, paranoid psychopaths that have been running the Soviet Union until perhaps lately, it's perhaps been a very good thing that they thought at least they knew what's going on through various molds, which they had rather high, certainly in the British Secret Service. And we've perhaps been safer since the Second World War because of that. It's perhaps irrational to think that their competence in spying has helped us, but I'd like you to comment on that too.
I think that's true. I think that ultimately intelligence that's balanced, that's pretty much equal, actually is a stabilizing influence because both sides know what the other side is doing, and that helps prevent misapprehensions, paranoia, etc. And that's fine. The problem is when there's a big imbalance between one side and the other side, and all of a sudden the side that's getting much more intelligence and knows much more starts thinking that they're superior and they can circumvent our defenses, and then you have a situation where we are in a very disadvantageous position. So that's why you have to have intelligence on both sides, and neither side should be winning because that can lead to a dangerous situation. As for your first point, that's exactly what happened in this case. That is, the lower level people, not only Bracey and Lone Tree, who certainly did confess to espionage, but other Marines who engaged in very small infractions, going to a bar with a Soviet woman or having even sex with a Soviet woman who, and they may or may not have known that they were Soviets, suffered tremendous setbacks to their careers, whereas the people who really made the decisions that led to this have suffered no reprisals whatsoever. For example, one of the detachment commander in Moscow who recommended that Lone Tree be removed from Moscow because he had a drinking problem, he was basically just a flake, he couldn't do his job right, he was simply a menace to the other Marines there, recommended that he be removed, and yet the person over that company, who was based in West Germany, overruled that recommendation and would not remove Lone Tree, and a few months later Lone Tree began spying. The person who overruled the detachment commander is still a Marine, nothing's happened to him, nothing's happened to his career, and yet these young men who never should have been sent there in the first place have suffered severe setbacks to their careers and their lives.
Let's get down to Houston, Texas. You're on C-SPAN. Go right ahead.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you. I'm very happy to have this forum with your author this morning to express an awful lot of concern that I have had since this whole thing came up with the embassy in Moscow. Now, it's my personal opinion, as an intelligent woman, that this whole thing is a Marx Brothers comedy, perpetrated on the minds of the American people who think it is a joke. There is no way in this world people should take this seriously. Now, there might be something behind it very serious, but I really feel like it's on the table because the American people are not stupid. Now, you know yourself that IRS, when they get somebody who's lagging behind in their tax a little bit, you know, and rinky-dink tax deal, those IRS agents will come to your house and put a lien on your house. None of these little guys get away. They are brought to justice. Now, here we have the highest levels of government. Can the Russians, who we know are spies for the KGB, sophisticated and all that sort of thing, and you cannot tell me that, good conscience, this government should allow an embassy like that to be exposed, even in the smallest way, to the KGB infiltration. Thanks.
Let me just jump in here because we have a lot of calls and not only a few minutes left. Could you respond?
Well, I certainly agree with you. And one particular problem is that the Congress at this point has not stepped in and tried to find out really what happened here. They've pretty much taken the word of the CIA that maybe nothing happened, or that things are still being studied, or still being or maybe there are anomalies. The intelligence committees have not really probed into this, and they've largely taken the word of the CIA. Until Congress gets involved, nothing's going to happen.
Go long distance, Honolulu, Hawaii. Go right ahead.
Yes. Good morning or evening, I guess, depending on where you are. I've got 3 specific questions for Mr. Kessler. And the first one is, were the commanding officers of these men disciplined also in regards to what happened?
Absolutely not. No officer was disciplined. It was basically a cover-up within the Marine Corps. They were very happy to let these young men take the hits, and as for themselves, they exonerated themselves.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I've got two more questions.
Okay, we'll have to move along here because you're almost out of time.
How many KGB agents and Spetsnaz are operating in the United States now, and what are they doing? Who's tracking them? And the last question is, how many are there KGB in upper levels of our government, especially policy-making agencies?
First of all, as far as overt agents are concerned, there are 6,000 officials from Soviet bloc countries here. About a third of them are believed to be either KGB or GRU intelligence officers. In addition, there are many so-called illegals who are not attached to any embassies, and we don't know how many there are of those. As for other so-called illegals, let's say, who are spies who've infiltrated government agencies, just like bank fraud, we find a certain amount of it, but we know that there's much more out there, and I think that's true in this case. There was one Czech intelligence service officer called Kosher who became a mole in the CIA for 12 years, and we can be sure that there are many more out there who have not been caught.
Go down to Spartanburg, South Carolina. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Kessler.
Hi.
As a former Marine, I have to be somewhat defensive of what appears to be, and I'm sorry if I say this with any degradation, what appears to be a blanket condemnation. I don't disagree with the fact that, yes, there needs to be a looking at the system, but the Marine Corps at this time is a technical operating strength of 197,000. Of those 197,000, the, quote, elite, I hesitate to use that term, but it's still the most difficult duty to get into recruitment, the drill instructor field, and embassy duty. When you take in consideration, you made a comment earlier that there's a 10% problem. That appears awfully high. And then also, you pointed out that Walker was found guilty of spying, but that's kind of an inference that Walker was also a Marine, and he was not. He was in the Navy. And it appears, and again, the inference is that the Marine Corps overall has a problem. Benedict Arnold was just one person. Certainly he was not reflective of the entire country.
Sure, the Marine Corps is very patriotic and well-trained, and we can be proud of the Marine Corps. And yes, there always will be a few spies out there, and to some extent we can't do anything about it. But the problem is that there's a systemic situation here, that these Marines who are sent for guard duty, particularly in Moscow, are not the best qualified. Lone Tree was sent out there, and he could barely fire a gun. I mean, he was so slow mentally and had such poor judgment. And then nothing was done about it, and no action has been taken against the people who made these decisions, and in fact they're still sending the same kind of people out there. So that's a situation where really there is a basic problem, and until that is rooted out, we have to continue to criticize the Marine Corps.
One more call. Let's go down to Tampa, Florida. You're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go right ahead.
This is Brooks Dixon.
Go right ahead.
I'm interested in discussing a point the young lady made a while ago about the small fry being put in the skillet while the big fish jump out of the pan. And with this author, he possibly has an opinion that I could share or disagree with. Ollie North is a small fry. The special prosecutor and Jim Wright are two chefs that are putting the burn on every human being in this nation who gives a hoot in Hillier, Kentucky, about the small fry of us who have to fight these wars. What does he suggest can be done to keep Ollie North and his type still willing to defend this country by whatever means possible? And he didn't lie to Congress. Congress is a liar.
I disagree. I think, first of all, that Ollie North is not a small fry at all. He was on the National Security Council. He had one of the most important positions in the security of our nation. And he blew it. He not only lied to Congress, but he also violated our laws. And what is it that we're trying to defend? What is the whole purpose of our security system and our defenses? It's to preserve our system of government, which is a system of laws. And if we say we can just do whatever we want, Ollie North didn't agree with Congress, so therefore he's going to go deal with the Contras, then we're doing exactly what the Soviets do. And that's what we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect our system.
Moscow Station, How the KGB Penetrated the American Embassy, is now in bookstores. Ronald Kessler, thank you very much for joining us.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thanks for your calls, and have a good day.